Kia ora. Welcome to Conversations with Wāhine, brought to you by the Wellington branch of the National Council of Women, New Zealand.
Hello and welcome to Conversations with Wāhine. Today you've got me, Harita, and I'm joined with Hayley. Today we've got two Labour MPs. One of them is Greg O'Connor. He has a unique journey into Parliament, having been elected after a long and successful 41-year career as a police officer. That included 20 years as the Police Association President. He is the Member of Parliament for Ōhāriu, a local Wellington electorate. After chairing the Transport and Infrastructure Select Committee and as Deputy Chair of the Finance and Expenditure Committee, Greg was promoted to the role of Deputy Speaker. He's standing for Ōhāriu this year in 2023, having represented the area since 2017. Our second guest is Jan Tinetti. She is a list Member of Parliament based in Tauranga. Jan pursued a career in primary school teaching, which saw her working in schools in Invercargill and Greymouth, before embarking on a career as a school principal. Over her 20 years as a primary school principal, she led across 4 schools across Southland and Tauranga. Her last position as principal before entering politics was at Maryvale School in one of Tauranga's most financially disadvantaged communities. Welcome, Jan and Greg. How are you both?
Great, thank you. Wonderful to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, kia ora. It's lovely to have a good distraction from the election campaign.
Well, some of these questions will be regarding the election, just a little bit.
Oh, it's just not the same thing as being on the doorsteps or at a meet the candidates.
Yeah.
So it's all novel.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the election, I'd be interested to know before we get started, what inspired you both to become politicians and more specifically Labour politicians?
So I'm probably one of the most reluctant politicians that you'll hope to ever see, because I never wanted to be a politician. It was never, ever in my realm of imagination that was something that I would even want to do. I'd been, as you said, a primary school principal for 20 years, and I was principal at a school in Tauranga, Maryvale, which we used to call them Decile 1, so from the lowest socioeconomic area in the country, one of the 10% of the lowest socioeconomic areas. And about 2015, I started to see things happening in Maryvale that I hadn't seen before. So I had some of my families that were starting to get put out of their rental accommodation because they were being evicted with no cause, and they were ending up living in cars and tents and garages. And at one point I had 10% of my school roll were living in that sort of situation. And so we were hearing a lot at the time about Auckland and a growing homeless population in Auckland. And I kept saying, gosh, this has to be more than just Auckland, because we're seeing it here in Tauranga as well. And I started to speak up about it, and I got on the radio. I was on Morning Report, and TV came to see me, and they interviewed my families, and kept going through different places and different media outlets. And then one day I got a phone call from someone at the Labour Party and said, look, we would love to have someone stand that knew this work in Tauranga, and would you consider it? And I promptly said, no, I do not want to be a politician. And I thought that was the end of it. But they phoned me 4 more times before I said yes. And the final time was actually one Phil Twyford, who phoned me and said, we really would like you to stand in Tauranga. Could you think about it? And I thought he was very persuasive. I didn't say yes. I said, I'll think about it, just so that I could get off the phone conversation with him. And I said, I'll ring you back next week. And in that time, I had an event that happened that changed my mind. One of my former pupils, who I'd actually struggled with. We'd had a relationship that was a bit of a love-hate relationship. He's one of those kids, when I had him at school, that it was a little bit difficult, but we'd always kept in touch. And he had his first job. He was a young dad. He was 19 and he had a young son, and he was really proud. He had been a gang prospect, but he was turning his life around, and he decided that the gang pathway wasn't for him. He lost his job under a 90-day contract it was about day 86, and he had no idea why he lost it, and that sent him into a deep depression. And unfortunately, he took his life, and it started through that. And I just that really impacted on me, and I still really struggle to tell that story, because it was the turning point for me. And it was at that point I thought, I'm making a difference here and now, but I'm not making a difference long term in their lives. And the only way that that is going to happen is by getting into politics, because that's where we can make lasting change. And so I phoned Phil up and said, well, I know you thought that I was going to say no, but I'm actually going to say yes here. And that was my entry into politics.
What about you, Greg?
And probably one of the most formative things for me as a police officer is working as an undercover officer, when I realised what privilege meant. Just privilege wasn't just about having wealth. I didn't grow up wealthy, but I grew up with the privilege of having, stable home, stable house, education, and all those things. And I met people when I was working undercover who were way brighter than me, way more able than me, but for the opportunities they'd never had, were really destined to a life of in and out of prison, and just really for a lack of opportunity. And that would it probably lit a flame for me. And I went back to police afterwards and sort of resumed my policing career. But I ended up in the police association because police officers were actually often when something happens with police, people will be very critical of police, but it's not police, it's the police officer who wears that. There's no police as such. So when people are very critical and demanding this and that of an incident had gone wrong, it's not the police, it's that particular officer. And often they are being pilloried. Probably the absolute best example of that was the Waitra case. Police officer totally innocent, found by every inquiry to be totally innocent, but life destroyed because it suited a lot of people, particularly in the media, to pillory him. And so just really standing up for the person who can't stand up for themselves, again, similar to Jan. And, if we are born with skills, I think, and Jan may agree, is that we're very lucky enough in life to get to the one place where the skills we have and have had to acquire or have acquired and enhanced, we can use them. And I think Parliament is that place. I really, when I stand up to speak or get involved in things, I said, I'm just so lucky to have somewhere where I can actually use the lessons that I've learned in life in my journey here. And I really believe that. So it's your first step is to be looking after people. I mean, I've got a disabled son, and again, being middle class and white in that system means that your ability to advocate is far greater than many who haven't got the skills or the ability to be articulate to actually advocate for their dependents. So even that's you realise that you start advocating for people in that way as well. Mm. So just using the skills that we've been given, acquired, and had the privilege to enhance.
That's really sweet. You have both been in Parliament since 2017.
Class of 17 kids, eh, Jan?
Yeah, right on.
How would you compare your first term to your second? Do you feel like you've been able to make much change, particularly during COVID times?
During the first term, it was about getting to know Parliament. It was I guess for both Greg and I. Greg had a little bit more, I think, to do with interacting with Parliament and his role that he had. And I'd had very little. I really didn't know what I was going into. And for me, that term was about being the foot soldier, being the person that would do the work. Whatever was needed of me, I was there. I would put my hand up to do whatever so that I could learn about the place, but also be that person that people could rely on. That was really important to me, that my integrity came with it, and that I could help the government of the first term get through the agenda that they had set. And I also had a really good relationship with the then Education Minister, of course, the now Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, in that he would come to me about, well, would certain things work within the education sector? So being able to utilise my knowledge of just having come from the sector and being able to help the then minister in that role. And also I was deputy chair of the select committee for the education and workforce, and navigating that and through those areas was interesting times as well. But certainly this term, since 2020, having come in as a minister, increased workload. I have to say that as someone who'd been a school principal, I never thought that I would find a job that was as busy as being a school principal. Turns out there is one that's a lot busier, and that's being a minister. And then I look at certain ministers like the Prime Minister and think there are jobs that are even busier than that again. But lots to do in this term, and what I had some really good advice in my first week, actually, as being a minister, and that was from one Ruth Dyson, who said to me, set down what you want to achieve in this term and really work on those priorities and check in on those priorities throughout the term, because if you don't, it will go so quick and you will be fighting fires the whole time, and you will get to the end of it and think, what have I achieved? And so it's the best advice that could have been given to me, because even with COVID, even with everything going on, we have stayed as a team, my team have stayed focused on those goals, and we have achieved so much over that term. So I've been absolutely really, really grateful for getting some good advice from some really good people.
It doesn't matter what you've done before you come to Parliament, you've got to be prepared to start again. Somewhat crudely, we always say to people who are starting again, you wherever you are, you get to be the king of the shits, but then you've got to be prepared to become the shit of the kings again, which means that you've got to put yourself out of your comfort zone. So many people stay like, I don't want to start again. And if you come into Parliament thinking that what you've done before is going to immediately qualify you for whatever you want to be, then start again, because like any profession, any job, you've got to learn your trade. And Jan and I, we spent that first 3 years, you speak on different topics. You've just got to understand what you're doing, because Jan's right. I spent a lot of time going in and out of Parliament, but I was going in and out. I wasn't going around. Once you're there, it's like, I like it's an anthill. You cut an anthill in half and there's thousands of ants all rushing off in different directions. They know where they're going. You try and put another lantern there that just because he looks like, or she looks like the rest of them, you think they know they're not, they're going to get eaten very quickly. So you really do have to, swallow and just say, right, there's a bit of time served there and absolute necessity. And I almost feel sorry for people that thrust into particularly cabinet roles too early before they actually understand their trade. And look, it's the second term. The first term is doing that. Second term, look, I've been privileged to be the Deputy Speaker for the last year. And boy, that was just really gave me an opportunity. I likened it to when I was a detective. I spent 2 years training detectives at the police college. Now, I used to know the law. By the time I'd trained detectives for 2 years, I understood it. And that was a little bit the same in the Speaker's role. I suddenly saw things happening that I could only have seen through sitting in that chair as a Deputy Speaker. And it's that's why I'm really feeling now I'm rounded, I'm ready to go in a way that I probably haven't been until now, certainly for that next level.
That's really cool that you put it that way. I guess, like, also when you're a Deputy Speaker of the House, you have that point of neutrality where you're not supposed to have, you're not meant to have your thoughts that Labour would have. You're just meant to be neutral to all the parties and all the people speaking as well. So you get to see a lot more of what the other party's thought process is, I guess.
Well, that's 100%, because that's exactly what happens. Parliament's quite a siloed place. I think, Jan, you'll agree that, especially since you become an education minister, you really haven't got time for much else. It's the same when you're on a select committee. You know, you work on your bills, you work on the area that comes through, but you don't really know a heck of a lot. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't really know much about education, other than, you know, the broad headline stuff. But we go to these election meetings, and if someone asks me a detailed question about education, I'm shocked. However, when you're a deputy speaker or sitting in that chair, you're actually seeing the whole passage. You're seeing things much more holistically, not only the legislation, but also the House itself.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, Jan, we've got a question for you. So you've been the Minister for Women since 2020. And what have you found to be the most uplifting and also the most challenging parts of this role?
So I never understood why I was even made Minister for Women in the first place, other than the obvious of being a woman. But I never really understood what the qualities were that the then Prime Minister saw in me that it sort of made me stand out for that role. But I'm going to say that it's probably been the absolute highlight to be Minister for Women, because it is such a role that has the potential to change lives in a way that I never really understood before I came in and worked with my most amazing officials in the Ministry for Women. For me, what has been a real highlight has been the uplift of and the recognition of women who really struggling, and they are disproportionately impacted by events such as the pandemic, and the identification of what their needs are and then the plans around changing that has been phenomenal. And I look at the work that we did through the development of the Women's Employment Action Plan, and the fact that I only launched that plan just over a year ago, but it was a plan that was created by women for women throughout the country. And I still have women who come up to me who say the difference that being involved in that has made, and that they're seeing some of the outcomes from that particular plan. The fact that if you look at some of the areas that we talked about, pay transparency being one of them, and we've announced the work that we're doing around a system for pay transparency. We talked about retirement savings, and we've, you know, as a government, we put that through in the budget to match the KiwiSaver contributions for retirement when someone's on parental leave. Well, that's directly because of the result of the work that we did around identifying that gender pay gap and the gap going into retirement savings. Childcare, the fact that that's a big barrier for women advancing in the workforce, and the fact that we've now looked at bringing the age of the 20 hours free early childhood to 2-year-olds has made a big difference. But one of the areas that I'm really most excited about, and it really was highlighted to me on a recent trip to Gisborne, and we had some women from the East Coast who were instrumental in putting that plan together and really contributed a lot. But the fact that we're talking about entrepreneurship now, and we're talking about women going into entrepreneurship and supporting them no matter how small their idea might be, because what we discovered when we were going around the country was so many women have these incredible ideas, but they might start as little cottage industries and they don't know how to get them off the ground. And we're now creating pathways for how we can support those women in their ideas and identify the barriers for them for taking that further. And, you know, one of the things I'm really excited about, if we do get re-elected, that we're actually piloting work in this area where we'll gather the information and the difference that it will make for women, and being able to walk that journey alongside them and give them the support that they need is just something incredible. But I guess from there, what I'd say is that, you know, women's unemployment rates always get hit really hard and disproportionately impacted after global labour market shocks, or any labour market shock, and the pandemic being one of them. That came back to equal with men in the quickest way that's ever happened before, that their low unemployment happened really, really quickly for women. And so you know, that's testament to the work that we're putting front and centre to make certain that women aren't disproportionately impacted when times are tough. And we're having the conversations now that women are front and centre, and the impacts of women are front and centre for any interventions that we have, to ensure that we're supporting people to be the best that they can be. And that's what excites me.
You're also the Minister for Education and Child Poverty Reduction. Can you give some examples of how gender inequality impacts these two policy areas? And what is Labour doing to reduce these poverty cycles?
So, you couldn't get three portfolios that have more synergy, I believe. And I was very excited when the now Prime Minister phoned me and said, these are the areas that I want you to come into in this particular part of the cycle. And when he said education, child poverty and women, and I thought, wow, that's just amazing, because if you get it right for the women and the mums, you'll get it right for the children, and you'll get it right for their education. Now, that's very simple, because it's not, we know that it's not as simple as that. But when it's tough, and I know Greg and I have actually had conversations like this before in the past, and I've had conversations about some of the people that he's had to work with in the past, and it's always the women that have the strong influence over the family, Greg, isn't it? That they're the ones that have that very strong influence over the family when things are tough, and when it is in a tough situation for them. And so it's ensuring that when it's not going well, that we're able to identify that and put in the right supports alongside. So in the child poverty space, you know, it's really important that lifting incomes first and foremost is really important. Lifting the benefits, so through benefits and through minimum wage rates, working for families is really important, and that puts more resourcing into the household. So that's going to ensure that those women have the resourcing to make certain that their young people are being lifted out of that poverty all the time. I can tell you stories from my past where I've had mums that have come in to see me that have been so hungry that they have not been able to eat, and they have chosen who's able to get dinner of a night time in their family because they've only got limited resources. We've done things like put healthy free lunches into schools where young people are the most needy. And I've had parents that have come to me and said, actually parents of my old school have come to me and said, you have no idea the difference that is making. No longer do we have to choose who is having a meal now at night time, or who's going to go hungry, or it's always been me that's gone hungry, because we've had that. We know our kids are getting really well fed at school, and it's putting more money into our pockets to be able to supply and be able to feed our kids at night time as well. Those are the differences that we're making. Those are the differences that we're taking away, that gender inequality that always falls back on the mum, or normally will fall back on the mum, but also making certain that our kids are in a great place that they can concentrate on learning. Because I can tell you from experience, when they're hungry, when they're insecure in their housing, when things aren't going right for them, it's really hard to concentrate on learning. So this makes a big difference to them overall, and that's what I get excited about.
To see people coming back to you and telling you stories such as that, it must feel amazing. And even though you're, I guess you could say, a reluctant minister, I think that would probably just make it all absolutely worth it.
100%.
Greg, this one is for you. Can you tell us a bit more about your time in the police, and specifically being an undercover cop in the drug and gang scene?
What I realised is that you think as a police officer I'd seen a lot of the world, but I hadn't really. I'd seen it through a police officer's eyes. And all of a sudden, I was on the other side, and I, became very close to a lot of the people. It was quite deep. It was, in those days, it was pretty amateur. Actually, we just went out and found out who was doing what. We had to find out who the drug dealers were, and who was the thieves and who was stealing stuff and selling stolen property, and you generally did that around the pubs. And then all of a sudden you found out I was getting to know people and liking them. And one of the worst things about the undercover was that you made friends with people and busted them. And that was, people talked about the danger of that being the danger of getting caught and beaten up, but that was actually only a very small part of the danger. It wasn't significant, but the real danger was loss of identity. And this is where I understood how lucky I was. When I finished, I came out and went back to the West Coast to the farm, went possuming, played rugby for the local rugby team, and actually repaired my soul. It took me a long time to realise how lucky it was, because a lot of my contemporaries at that time never came back. Now, they might have come back and put the uniform on or even gone on for a wee while, but they never came back. And a lot of them ended up leaving and drifting. And I buried one of them just recently up in Wāhine, who had actually been dead for 2 months before anyone found him. You know, that was how far your life can drift if you haven't got stability. And he didn't really have that. And that was when I realised, just having a stable background, how privileged you are if you have got those things, and why it's so important to give people the building blocks for that. And the building blocks for that, for me, is housing, stable, being able to go to the same school. Jan, you'll know this, without not being on your sixth school for the year when you arrive, and never having stable friends. I went to Buller High School, and I even looked back, and there was a lot of bankers and people that came through, and their kids would only be with us for 2 years because they were doing their country service in Westport, and they'd go on. And gee, I was only later on, I felt so sorry for those people, because they just never belonged anywhere. So just that stable housing and stability is just so important. But yeah, look, policing again. You look at through policing at the eyes you're at. I was a young man. I was 18 when I went in. I was an 18-year-old, in the world, and you looked at things. And now, by the time I finished, I was seeing things. You start off quite idealistic. You realise that people generally do tell you lies, and that's you can become cynical, because you learn that you probably can't trust a lot of people. That's reality. The other thing as a police officer, you are victims are what shape you, because when you first start in the police, you mostly deal with victims. You don't deal with that many criminals, actually, and that comes later. And so realising the impact of crime on people's lives is actually the biggest shaper of police officers. And it's a single entry. People come in from that point, and most people in their first 2 years will spend their time as dealing mostly with victims, particularly burglaries. Possibly a little more specialist now, but that's what shapes you. It's often only later on that you reflect on how you were shaped by these things. One thing I know with my own working life now is that you imagine coming in as an 18-year-old, and you're always waiting for the next job, the next bit of excitement. Even right through, even when I became a detective, you're working on sort of mundane fraud things and that, but then you're waiting for the homicide, because you dropped everything when a homicide came along. And that actually shaped my working life. And I had to realise that, hey, you've actually got to knuckle down and do the hard mahi, and not be necessarily always waiting for the next exciting thing to come along. And it took me probably even till I got to Parliament to realise that actually you can't just wait for the next big thing to happen. You've actually got to do the hard yards. That's what on the side I love about being in Parliament. There's nowhere to hide. If you're lazy, if you are a bad person, or if all these things, you'll get found out there, because it's a goldfish bowl.
There's been a lot of discussion about gangs. Are there any misconceptions that you're seeing floating around when it comes to people in gangs, or how best to change the lives of the humans that do join it?
Look, this is where I am a bit. Look, there's nothing good about gangs. There's nothing good about them. I saw rapes. I saw, just how they're the most misogynist, sexist group by nature. And individually people are fine, but when they're in the gang, they're not individuals. That's the difference. I played rugby when I was in Masterton with gang members, and individually fine, but you've got to understand the gang, while you are still wearing that patch, that is your defining ethos, and they have all power over you. and there's nothing good about them. And anybody who purports, yes, there's second, third generations, and people have grown up in there, but not everybody goes into the gangs, because you've got to remember, it's easy to blame, it's all about poverty. Well, yes, it may have been once, but it's not just about poverty. It's actually about money. Now, look, the gangs I remember being in Pororua as a young police officer in the 1970s when the mongrel mob were at their height. It really was. It was the old, nothing sophisticated about it. It was violence. It was just the old once were warriors stuff there. I went back as a detective about 10 years later, and things had changed. They'd grown up. Those guys had been running around locking up for stealing cars and stuff. They had a lot of their jobs, and things are better. And then what changed was the methamphetamine. Methamphetamine all of a sudden just brought money into it, and that's what now governs it. And so the people who are the heads of those gangs, it's about the business, and it's mostly about the business of methamphetamine. It's a business of everything. You get in Australia now, it's all about illegal cigarettes owned by the gangs, and that's starting to happen here. Illegal cigarette sales, because they're so expensive, someone's got to be doing the smuggling, and guess who does it? So look, it's the one thing. There is nothing good about gangs. Whether just getting tough, dismantling them and taking their power away is important. You do that by taking the money away. That's the first thing. So that the kids that grow up in let's say the poor end of town, don't see that the only guys with flash cars and with the flash throwing the cash around with the good-looking young girlfriends, it's the gang members. So they don't grow up wanting to be like that. They do grow up wanting to be a warrior or a sports person. But while they're the role models, you've got to stop them from being the role models. And that's sophisticated. That's a generational thing. You don't do it by press release, which I can see many think they can. They're going to come into government and fix this in a jiffy. If you understand anything about the Australian convict situation, go to Norfolk Island, where the worst of the worst went to Norfolk Island, and it didn't cure them. It was in fact, they used to draw lots for who they'd murdered, so they'd go back to the mainland for a trial, so they get off there. But that was, if it was that easy, someone would have done it.
What are your thoughts on the idea behind actually banning the wearing of gang patches?
In some cases, short term it might have an effect. Long term, it won't. I mean, go to the supermarket, go in here and see someone with red shoes on. Go and see someone with blue shoes on. That's for anyone. That's as good as a patch. And the kids at school all know that. The colours. Jan, you'll know that from your area.
Yep, 100%.
Go to any school, and kids, even in prisons, even the colour of their underpants. They've got to have neutral colours for everything, because colours just mean so much. So the patch, what worries me, again, it's one of those things that, yes, we're going to do this and that's the problem solved. Well, yeah, it's not the problem solved at all. It's got to be, if it's going to be done, it's got to be as a part of a range of measures to depower. It's like your strategy's got to be to do this, to disempower the gangs, to make the gangs, so that, as I say, the next generation doesn't grow up wanting to be a gang member, because the prisons are full of them. This is and it's just a pathway. But not everybody, you've got to keep remembering, you get a group of a family from a poor area, only one of them will end up with the gang, the rest of the kids won't. And that's what you've got to keep remembering, that sometimes the people who end up in the gangs are often ones, have been bad little buggers from the start. Jan, you probably might have your view on that, but you can probably pick out, because the brothers and sisters won't, but with that one that's, that you've got all those circumstances. And that study, that Dunedin study, has shown, hasn't it? You've got the five demographics, you're likely to be 15% enhanced possibility. If you've got this gene, it's 15%. If you've got both, it's 90% chance of being involved in criminal activity. That came out of that Dunedin study, of which one of the main guys, just died, didn't he, this week?
Yeah, Richie Poulton just died yesterday.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Another point on crimes and gang behaviour is that at the moment, ram raids have been at an all-time high over the last few years. And while this isn't your portfolio, but in consideration of your previous career experience in the police, is the number of police that we have at the moment appropriate for the level of crime that happens in New Zealand, or do we need more police and more people specialising in different types of crimes?
When I was in the police association, people would ask me, how many cops do you need? I said, what do you want to do? I would never say more. I said, work out what you want to do. Ram raids have come down because this is typical of any crime type. It gets out of control. It's a new type. It often comes from the United States. You get kids following it. There's a very good reason why ram raids. When I was, again, a young police officer, burglaries were common. There's way more burglaries than there are now because people had money in their house. People would have things like videos and TVs to steal. Well, really now, the type of valuables you have in your house, there's no real market for them because you can go to the Women Warehouse and buy stuff cheaper than I used to buy it for in pubs when it was hot. And also security's increased. It's a lot harder. There's no cash around, so the type of crime changes. So the only way you can actually get the cigarettes is to drive a car, and so to actually do the crime, to get that gear out, you've got to be pretty unsubtle about it. And of course, add to that the whole videoing it and Facebooking it and YouTubing it and all those different things, then you've got a recipe there. But police have done a really good job there by targeting it. It was always a crime would get out of control. I remember being in Wellington where the Nomad gang got out of control, and it was sort of ignored because everyone was off doing other crime. And then finally, about 2 or 3 murders, and someone said, "Oh, we better get rid of these." And they did, and they were focused. And then Wellington settled down for another 5 years. And the problem, sometimes you move it elsewhere. So a lot of it will be if you focus on that area. Fraud. Police stopped doing fraud many years ago. And only a warning: don't do this, because if police don't do it, no one will be doing. That's essentially what happens. And it's a lot of smart offenders. You go to Malvina Major down the road from here, one of the safest places as far as what people there will consider conventional crime is. What's the biggest crime? Cybercrime. They get every day, they're getting people getting in there and getting ripped off by in-laws there, never been a victim of crime in their whole lives. The most target-hard people got ripped off for 80 grand. And they didn't still consider that real crime. So those, you just have to. And now there's some very good work going on the ram raids, and they're down.
Yeah, it's good to know. I think they were going up recently, but as you said, it's very, very new. So they've been putting a lot more focus on it. Although I have heard that some of the work that Labour have been doing in order to combat it isn't quite working as well as they may have intended, the fog cannons and so forth. Do you know much about that?
Well, that's at the victim end. See, even now it's quite interesting. Your victims of crime change. Dairy owners are now a new, they're a new victim type almost, because they have cigarettes. And cigarettes, when I used to smoke when I was a younger man, I keep saying when I was a younger man, the price of cigarettes wasn't a factor in your decision to smoke or not. But now it is. Boy, I was standing watching, I was in the supermarket and someone bought a couple of cheap items of food and then bought a pack of cigarettes, and the cigarettes were way dearer than any of the food they'd bought. I thought it was $35 for a packet. I mean, that's real money. So you've got black, that now creates a whole black market. And unfortunately, those who are the dispensers of the cigarettes become the victims. And that's what the poor old dairy owners are now. They have got a very valuable product now sitting behind them, and so criminals will go after them. So they are almost a new class of victim that weren't. There was always shoplifting before. Kids are going to shoplift, but there wasn't a few lollies, but it wasn't when you get into their cigarette lockup, you potentially got thousands of dollars worth of stuff you can peddle in the to among your mates. And that's why. That's the crime changes all the time.
And can I just jump in there, because you're talking about the victim end, but actually what we want to do is make certain that the perpetrators, that we're not getting recidivist action happening here. And one of the areas that I've seen in the last few months that I think is just stunning and goes unheralded is the work that has been trialled in South Auckland. And that's the work that we've funded with Kotahi Te Whakaaro. I've never seen anything like it. In fact, I think that there are areas of government that we could take this as an example and use across other areas of government too. So what it essentially is that every single day, government agencies and NGOs come together, so a set number come together, and they look at the crime, the ram raiders that have happened, or the ram raids that have happened the night before. And so you'll get people from police, people from Oranga Tamariki, people from Ministry of Education, people from youth mentoring, people from social welfare come in, and iwi come in, Pacific representatives come in, and they look at all of that that's happened the night before. Within hours of that crime happening, there is a youth mentor that turns up on the doorstep of that family and finds out
because they mostly get caught, don't they, Jan?
Yeah, because they mostly get caught. Yeah, so they mostly get caught. They turn up on the doorstep. They find out exactly what are the issues, because we know that there are underlying drivers to what's happening and why they've become involved in the first place. And then all of those agencies come together to solve what the issues are and to make certain that that young person stops their involvement in the crime. And the figures are well over 80% that those young people are not recidivists, so they can stop it right there. They are having that much success. But what they also do is that they might see that there are younger siblings or other people that could potentially be at risk of being involved as well. And so they're stopping those people becoming involved in the crime because they're identifying what the needs are to keep them crime free. And that is having a huge difference. The work that they are doing, the changes in lives that they are making is just exceptional. That's what we do. We want to help the victims. That's important. But we also want to make certain we're stopping the crime. And that's why the numbers of ram raiders are coming down. It's superb work. I've never seen anything like it. And I think it's just incredible. But you probably haven't heard about it. And I'm just so excited that they're there making the difference, because some of these young people are as young as 8 that are involved. And if we don't do that, what pathways have we set up for them? We want to make certain that they've got brilliant pathways in front of them.
And what that does too is identifies, look, and sound like the old cynical cop. There are some bad little buggers out there, and it identifies them and it isolates them almost. And they're the ones that are going to be part of the system. I mean, I know someone pretty close who's just got 3 years in jail for some pretty bad crimes. He had every opportunity, relations, people bent over backwards for this guy. But he just eschewed everything. He wanted to be a gangster. And he'll be in jail now on and off until he's probably 30, till one day he'll wake up and get sick of being in jail. And there just are people. So what you do is these good programs like this, they actually get the people that can be stopped. There will and we just have to accept there are some people, it doesn't sound, it's not very popular to say, there are some people that are destined for especially their 20s to be in jail, because it stops being about those people. It becomes about protecting society and protecting potential victims. Sounds like a bit cynical old cop, but you can't forget that there are people that actually, jails are there. There's some people, it's the only place for some people to protect everybody, but don't throw them in straight away.
That's very interesting. Jan, as mentioned before, you've been Minister for Education and Child Poverty Reduction since the Cabinet reshuffle in February. I guess in some ways they do go hand in hand, as coming from poverty does usually mean less success in good education, and children are less likely to attend school regularly. What is being done to cross this bridge and raise the standard of education and basic numeracy and literacy?
So really important that identifying first off what the barriers are to young people, getting to school and then achieving at school. And the drivers of those aren't simple. So I have to put that out there to start with. The drivers of non-attendance and non-achievement or low achievement are actually really, really complex. People try and simplify education, and I can tell you from someone that was involved in it for nearly 30 years, it is not simple, and teachers are amazing in what they do, but we've got to make certain that we support our teachers to be the best that they can be. So first of all, we need to get our young people to school. What are some of the barriers? The barriers are that we have had poverty that has impacted upon them being able to get there. So we have to look at areas outside, and I've already covered some of those outside of education, to make sure that we're constantly looking at and having that lens about lifting wages, lifting benefits, assuring that they're indexed properly. All of those things are incredibly important. But then we have to look at what we can do within the school gates. And so we have to look at how we reduce the barriers. Having the healthy lunch program is really big. Having period products, free period products, that was something that I'm really passionate about. I had young people as young as 6, and that often happens in poverty, areas of poverty, where they start menstruating a lot younger, and they were missing school when they were 6 years old because that was a barrier for them. So let's deal with that, but let's also educate at the same time. So that's incredibly important too. Money into the attendance service. So we've uplifted the attendance service and the amount of money that goes into it, because in 2013, attendance services were taken further away from schools. So that relationship with those key people, those young people that were non-attending, the attendance services didn't know, they didn't have that relationship quite the same when we created the super attendance service was created. So we've actually put them closer to schools again. We've gone from, I think it's not quite sure of the numbers, but it's in the 20s to attendance services to now in the 70s. So we've got way more attendance services that are dealing with the schools closely. We've funded new attendance officers to help schools understand what the issues are that they're facing. We've created a really evidence-based attendance strategy that has that evidence and research that sits behind it. But what it's also doing is making certain that schools understand that attendance is important. So I'm seeing now really exciting stuff where schools are telling their whānau what their attendance rates are on a daily basis. So they're keeping it front and centre, that everybody understands the urgency behind it. But most importantly, we're also resourcing schools at a local level to ensure that they are able to employ their own strategies that will work for them. And an example is in Northland, which has a very, very complex issue around non-attendance. And of course, because it's in Northland, it's going to have that different drivers than what people in the South might have. They've come up with a strategy, and I see the results come to me every week. They used to get 30% regularly of attendance in their schools every week. They're now well over 80%. And they've done that because they've put that focus on. So we've resourced them to be able to do that, and that's making a big difference. With achievement, we will not want to make certain that people and young people have those literacy and math skills that are needed for them to be able to go through life and make really solid choices. But education's been really funny because people come in with ideologies, governments come in with ideologies. I've been sick and tired of that in my time in education, that it always changes around, that we go 3 years and then we worry because it might all change again. So what we've done is we've brought together a group of experts, have looked at all the data, looked at all the research and the evidence base, and brought that together of what is going to make the big difference to our young people in their achievement levels. So let's take reading, for example, looking at the whole of the science of reading and not just taking one little part of it, but the whole of that, then presenting that to our teachers to be able to say, this is the best evidence. But not only that, what we've also announced is supporting our teachers. So if we get re-elected, giving them the professional development so that they can make certain that they are able to be the best that they can be, and that science of learning that we're talking about they understand it and they're able to teach it. And that's really, really important. So we've identified what the problem is. We've made a problem definition, which nobody's really done before. They've just pointed finger at each other, but we've identified the problem. We've created the problem definition. We've created the strategies based on evidence. And now we're implementing those strategies to make certain that our young people have everything that they need to be, the best they can be by the time that they leave school.
I have so many more questions I wanted to ask you about education, but we are running low on time. I did want to ask you, Greg, as Deputy Speaker of the House, what are some consistent communication issues that you've come across?
Be careful, Greg.
Look, we have an adversarial system, where one side wants the other side's jobs. Let's cut through it. That's what it's about. You've got let's say in a parliament that's 49% one way and 51% the other way, that 49% are going to be doing all they can to make the 51% look bad, so that they get their jobs. That's so you come in at levels of with ideology and Jan said determination to achieve when you're there. Look, you can achieve a lot across the board, and people who get particularly their members' bills through, and even ministers who get some, who do the mahi, be fair to say, wouldn't it, Jan, who can find people who are prepared to work on the other side. And so when you're in the chair, you're sort of watching for that. There are other people who are there. They'll be always very good in opposition because they're good at pulling stuff down, and they've been a good debater or good something like that, but they just destroy. But then when they're tasked with actually building or being positive, then probably a different skill set, different sort of person required. Look, there is a lot of, I think if I'm asking you a question, right, there is a lot of cooperation, particularly around select committees. What you see in question time is theatre. Largely theatre. There's a lot of gotcha, and it's a big gotcha place. Everyone's looking for a gotcha. I mean, you look at these debates that are taking place between our leaders at the moment. Everybody's sitting watching. It's the lion's den. We've got people, it's been sold, TV1, TV3, the press debate, and every one of them wants will there be a gotcha moment for either of the leaders? And the House question time particularly is about that. Can Jan Tinetti, she's the education minister, can we ask her a question? We got a gotcha. And that's, and that doesn't really drive necessarily good policy or good outcomes. But the real hard work is then done at the select committees. And you get a good select committee, a well-led select committee with good people who want to make a bill better, and it happens, and you see it. And the speeches, this is what I really again enjoy about being deputy speaker, because you know who's done the hard yards, who knows what they're talking about when they're speaking in the House, and who's picked up and they're making it all up, and as they go along, you can tell that sort of stuff. And there's some amazing how many people are still watching Parliament at 9 o'clock at night that they talk to you about. I saw you, I heard the speech, and that was very good, that was very bad. You'd be surprised, but it's just a place where there's nowhere better to do it. And it'd be lovely to say, wouldn't it be great if we all got on and was all about one thing? Well, that's called a dictatorship, where there is no debate, because if you're going to get on, it means you can't get up and be critical. Let's face it. So got old Winston got it right. Winston Churchill, not the other Winston, that we all hope won't be back there. Winston Churchill said, worst form of government except for all the others we've ever tried. And that's pretty much true.
It's a good point there. I think see, my family's from India, and I mean, I never lived in India, but I always kind of think we've got small problems in our political system, but nothing compared to what so many countries like India, China, and, a lot of those countries have, where it's dictatorship, and you'll have the same government will be in for a whole person's lifetime, because there's no such thing as free speech or being able to vote every few years. And Yeah, like you look at what happens on the news every day and you're just like, oh, New Zealand is, our political system is so peaceful in comparison. And all the politicians can speak their mind without having negative consequences at the end of it, because that's the whole point of our political system.
It does worry me that we don't understand that we are non-corrupt. That's the really thing. New Zealand is we're a straight country. I mean, I was a cop for 40 years and I never took a bribe, but I never got offered one. Yeah, there'd be very few police in the world officers for 40 years because they never got offered a bribe, because corruption's a two-way street. There's a corruptor and a corruptee. There's got to be two parties involved. And in New Zealand, it is straight. And I just do worry that we're not understanding why New Zealand does work the way it does. And we can't ever let that corruption sneak in. We get annoyed about some of the petty stuff, but actually in some ways, exposing that petty stuff stops it from getting any bigger, because as you'll know, a lot of countries, MPs, there's not a real election. You're appointed and you don't ever see the people. I mean, this is what I used to going to the market. New Zealand MPs at the market, you get people from the subcontinent come over, and while they take photos, wouldn't believe it, the member of parliament is in the market. You can see him, touch him, shake his hands, her hands. Doesn't happen in a lot of countries.
Got a quick question, and this is probably not even in your realm, but it could be. So I live in the electorate of Ōhāriu as well, and when I told a few of my friends that I was interviewing you today, a few of them were like, oh, can you ask him what's happening with Johnsonville Mall and why it's been in the state it has been for our whole lives? And obviously I know it's not really a political problem because it's owned by a private company, but do politicians ever have any input on projects like that have just been standstill for years on end? Like, do you have any say with where it could go?
Well, as a politician, your job is to find out how you can. When something is so important as the Johnsonville Mall. Originally, the council were at fault because they didn't want a mall up here thriving because they were worried what it would do to downtown Wellington, the Golden Mile. So the development should have take place at different stages. They've been going to develop it. They had GFC, they had the earthquakes and different things. I'm working with, I've spoken to the board, spoken to the chair, in contact. They were ready to go last year. The funding was pulled by the Australian Masters, and I'm now determined, if I'm re-elected, that is going to be my goal, to the extent that if nothing's happened in 3 years' time, then I'll take full responsibility. Not that I have responsibility, but you can. That's what you do as an MP. You find out how you can help to make things happen. It may not be obvious. It may not even be, certainly won't be in your job description, but it doesn't mean you can't do it. Mm-hmm. So I'll get a movie theatre there for you, some nice restaurants. The plan at the moment is to be multi-level, with to have accommodation, residential, office, and some retail, but mostly sort of entertainment, the new modern mall. There.
That's good. That's good to know.
Exciting. Jen, what do you hope to achieve if elected this year, particularly around pay parity for teachers and ensuring the work that they do is recognised and well compensated?
Absolutely. So I really passionate around the fact in the education space that we've got to recognise the work of our teachers, which I'm just going to point out that over our term of 6 years, the pay has gone up for teachers by 36%. And in the 9 years prior to us coming in, it went up by 10%. So we pretty much on a good solid footing in that we do recognise the work. What I am going to say, though, is that I do acknowledge that it became too adversarial in the industrial negotiations, and one of the recommendations in the arbitration panel that came back recently after the secondary teachers collective bargaining was that we could look at a different way of industrial negotiations, and I'm really up for that challenge, and so are the unions. So I've been starting to have those discussions with the unions around how we might be able to look at a different way of bargaining, and some unions in different sectors are doing that really successfully. So that's something that I'm really up for, that challenge, and it's something that I would really like to see us going through and taking through into the next term. But I'd also like to really have a focus on ensuring that the strategies that we've put in place, which are based on really good, solid evidence and research, that we have the opportunity to implement those well. Because what we need to do is position education so it's not a political football every 3 years. I want to see that we come to some agreed spaces within the education portfolio so that our young learners are not constantly the guinea pigs all the time. They are far too important, and the world is changing at such a fast rate at this point in time with AI and everything else that's hitting us, is that we need to make certain that we're not constantly changing our focus in education too. So that's something that I would really like to achieve and really working hard on. The one last area that I would say, which is really important to me, is that our learning support has been the most broken area within education. We have done some work around a high needs review. We have to implement that work. We have to get it underway. We have to make certain that our education system is responsive for all learners. And that's something that I'm 100% committed to.
Oh, that's great. I'd love to see how that goes. We do only have a minute or two left, so we'll have to make these responses quick. However, I have had a really good laugh over some of the antics that do happen in Parliament TV. And you both must have gathered a load of funny stories over the time, I'm sure. Are you able to share any memories that still make you laugh today? We'll start with Jan.
I have so many funny stories, and some of them I can't tell. So they are ones that I'm probably not yet able to say, but there've been times when I've been sitting in the House and I've been listening to people speaking, and I'm thinking, what's this relating to? Is this the actual bill that they're speaking to? And then you look at it and they've actually gone on to a different bill, and it's not the bill that they're supposed to be speaking to. And that happens across the House. Greg will be able to tell those stories of people that do that, or they can't work out, because you've got to get, there's certain protocols that you've got to get right. And I've actually been guilty of this myself, that you have to be able to say the title of the bill exactly as it's written, and I've totally mucked that up, even though you have it there in front of you, and you feel really stupid, but you have to laugh about it and have a good laugh. And they probably don't sound that funny, but they're very funny when you're in the middle of it.
Yeah, look, nothing leaps to mind sort of funny or most significant. The one thing I'll remember is being able to go to Papua New Guinea as an election observer, and being in the jungle up in the northwest. It was just to see people lining up what they did to vote. It was just the biggest privilege of my life to be able to share that and just come back and tell people, hey, look, democracy really matters. These people, they get to vote once every 5 years, the only time they have any connection, a lot of them, with sort of the capital. There is no ability, and they do it. And they vote in vast numbers, and do it at often great personal risk and effort. So yeah, that was one of the, if nothing else, that's the biggest privilege I've had to be part of this. Fun, yeah, it's you've got to enjoy yourself, don't you, Jan? You've got to enjoy yourself. Take the job seriously, but don't take yourself seriously. That's the real key to this place.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great way to end the interview. Thank you both so much, and good luck with the elections. This has been Hayley and Harita with Jan and Greg on Conversations with Wāhine.
Thank you.
Thank you.